in our virtual world here. Okay, so I didn't hear that lovely introduction, but I will thank Lee for what I'm sure was a great introduction. I'm Bill Doherty from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm delighted to be with you, at least virtually here. And I'm hoping that the technical issues are resolved so that you can all hear me. So I see, Cameron, can you hear me? Could you do this? Okay, and I'm assuming people in person can hear me as well. Okay, so I have about 20 minutes to set up the challenge of polarization in our time, and to talk a little bit about what Braver Angels is trying to do to address it. And I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share here. All right, so the problem of polarization has been rising in the US for at least 35 years through multiple administrations, happening in Europe too. Think about Brexit, look what's happening in France and other countries right now. And historians are saying that we are at levels of polarization in this country not seen since the 1850s. And we know what happened after that. So a big rise through multiple administrations happening in multiple countries. And the thing I want to emphasize is that it's not just about issues, but about how we regard our fellow Americans who differ from us politically. So it's not that we are more left-wing, right-wing on issues, but it's how we think about each other. And I'd like you to be thinking about this, not just how we feel about the heads of other political parties in our own, but how we think about the 70+ million people who consistently vote differently than you or I do in national elections, as well as our local elections. And a group of social scientists have pulled together some of that literature and talk about 3 dimensions to what's called affective polarization or sectarianism. And the first is other, that people who differ from us politically are the other, alien. I don't get them. They're strangers, incomprehensible. So I invite you to think about how often you have said to yourself or to somebody else, who are those people? How could they possibly support that candidate, hold that position? So the first is they're alien. I don't get those people. And the second is that they're unlikable and untrustworthy. So I don't get them and I don't like them. And the third is that they're morally or ethically compromised, so that people who support politicians, parties, political positions that are different from mine, I see them not just as wrong, but as evil or as supporting evil. So how do we actually get along and do politics together if we don't understand each other, if we don't like each other, don't trust each other who are different, and we see the other as morally compromised? So this polarization, which is, we see it most clearly in national politics, and as well as state and local politics, has invaded most aspects of life in our country. So families, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and talk a lot to therapists. Therapists have never seen the degree of animosity of even cutoffs that are occurring in families over political differences, and we don't choose our extended families. We can choose our friendship circles, we choose our work circles and so on where we worship, but you don't choose who your cousin marries, and their relatives. So families are splintering or just not talking over about political polarization. Schools and school boards. Heck, school board meetings used to be kind of boring. Not anymore. And so we have the invasion of polarization into school boards. Colleges and universities, it's happening all over. And civic organizations are struggling, many of them, over red versus blue politics. Companies, so increasingly we've had big companies approaching us in Braver Angels about how they can deal with, the day after an election, or the day after the recent Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade. The old water cooler conversations can be kind of dicey. And so companies are trying to figure out how they can manage something that I call political diversity, where we're emphasizing many kinds of diversities in our workforce, but political diversity we're struggling with. And then religious denominations and congregations. I did a workshop for rural Lutheran pastors, the Southeast Minnesota Lutheran Synod, and a lot of them are getting pressure to take political stance, particularly as elections come up, and people in congregations are more and more divided. So we have then the invasion of political polarization into the fabric of American life in really unprecedented ways. That is really quite troubling. So an example, what I call close to home polarization. In 1960, only 5% of Americans said that they would be uncomfortable with their son or daughter marrying somebody of the other political party, just 5%. Now that percentage has moved up to 40 to 45% of Americans who say they would be uncomfortable with their child marrying somebody of the other political party, bringing that other into the family. But it's not that we've become less tolerant in general, because attitudes towards interracial marriage have gone the other direction. So now it's only a very small percentage of Americans who would be uncomfortable with interracial marriage in the family. So inter-party marriage is now a much bigger deal. When I was young, Catholic Protestant marriages were, we called them mixed marriages, let alone interracial marriages. Now, much less so there, but inter-party. So it's a sign of something that's happened in our culture. So here's just a little bit of data. Political scientists like to measure how much warmth people feel to their own party and how much warmth or coolness they feel towards the other party. And so this is just a look from 1980. You can see that the average American had, if on a temperature scale, about 74 degrees warm towards their own party. 50 degrees kind of neutral about the other party. You expect people to like their own party more. And then look at the gap that's opened up. And it's not that people like their own party more, but their antipathy for the other party has increased, so that now we're at the freezing mark, okay? Not neutral towards the other party. And this bottom graph that just looks at it a different way to indicate that now out-party hate, how much I hate the other party, is stronger than how much I love my own party. And I'm sure you can see that in your world. So it's not that Democrats are more in love with the Democratic Party and Republicans with the Republican Party, but it's the animosity towards the other party that has really changed. So it's sort of a hyper negative partisanship is what we're dealing with. So actually, before I do the next slide, I just invite you to think for a moment. If I were there in person, we would do this interactively. What do you think are some of the causes or sources of this rise in polarization? Remember, it's happened in the last 35 years or so, mid-'80s, it began to really take off. It's not just in this country. It's not just when one party's in power. So I urge you to, when you think about the sources, to not take the simplistic approach. Well, it's the other party, the people that you don't like, because those people are not in England, and they weren't involved in Brexit. And it's certainly not just since 2016, and although there's been some spiking since then in polarization. So I invite you to think about what some of the sources are, and I'll go through some of the ones that the social scientists talk about. More new media and media silos. So when some of us grew up, there were 3 TV networks and public television, and there were common sources of information. There probably were disadvantages of too few sources, but now we have so many that what people can do is basically get the information that fits their preconceptions of politics and what's going on in the world. So media silos, we don't share the same information base. Social media is clearly one, and all the political scientists point to that, because this has arisen, in the last 15, 20 years or so. It was not around 35 years ago. And social media is both a place where people do hyper conflict with each other. They say things to each other they would never say in person. And we have the viral spreading of often deliberately placed misinformation or rumors that spread. And there's research on saying that our level of critical thinking goes down when we see something in social media that fits our prejudice, our presuppositions, and then we pass it on. So social media is a huge, I call it an accelerant of social conflict and polarization. The lack of overlap between the political parties, and that relates to the next one of gerrymandering. If you go back 40 years or so, there were moderate and conservative Democrats and liberal and moderate Republicans, and there was overlap between the parties, and that's where things tend to have gotten done. When there were people who were closer ideologically to one another, even though they were in different parties. Now, they're in Congress, there is really little or no overlap between the parties in terms of conservative and liberal. So both parties have gotten more purist. And gerrymandering, of course, reinforces this because 85% or so of congressional districts are what are called safe districts, that you're not apt to be voted out by the other party. It's mostly your own party. You're more at risk to be primaried, that's become a verb, by people who are more extreme in your party. So with Braver Angels, I've been doing some work with members of Congress who are concerned about this and who are not having any fun in politics these days. And one of them told me, a member of the House said, if he were seeing, if a photo were taken of him shaking hands with a member of the other party, and that made the local newspapers back home, he could be primaried by somebody who viewed him as consorting with the enemy. So gerrymandering, lack of overlap, globalization has been a factor in creating a lot of economic insecurity. We've lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, a lot of outsourcing. The theory behind it was that all the ships would rise, and not all of them rise. So globalization creates economic insecurities that lead to polarization. Same thing with income inequality, which is connected to globalization. More money in politics, far more money, and specialized money. I was talking to somebody who lost an election for Congress from a state that has only one member of the House of Representatives. And she told me that multiple millions of dollars came into the state from national sources with the explicit purpose of defeating her. and mostly around a particular single issue. That didn't happen as much before. And then I want to end with this part of it, with the decline in social trust and confidence in social institutions. We have a crisis of a lack of trusting one another and trusting our institutions. If you go back to 1970, 2/3 of Americans said that they thought most people could be trusted to live up to their word. And that's down below 35% now. And each generation, like the millennials, are less trusting of the generations that came before. So we don't trust other people that much. And we don't trust our social institutions. Almost every social institution, government, religion, healthcare, the courts, you name them, we feel less trusting of those social institutions. And therefore, we become more tribal, if you will. We cluster in like-minded groups, and we become hyper loyal to a political party, in part because we think that the rest of the world doesn't have our interest at heart. So we have a big problem in this country, and I want to talk just for a few minutes about what we're trying to do with Braver Angels. Braver Angels got started by happenstance, really, after the 2016 presidential election, when two colleagues of mine, one from New York City, David Blankenhorn, and another from Southwest Ohio, decided on the spur of the moment to get 10 Hillary Clinton voters and 10 Donald Trump voters together for 13 hours over a weekend in Southwest Ohio to see if they could talk to each other and not just about each other. And this was December 8th to the 10th, 2016. And they invited me to design what we would do and facilitate it, which I had never done anything like that before, but thought, okay, now's the time. And it was a very powerful experience of people seeing what they had in common, and reminding each other that they had communities to run, they had schools to run, and hospitals and roads to build, and they couldn't do it if they just were treating each other so poorly. We thought it would be a one-off, but it wasn't. They wanted to have a reunion. They cashed in another frequent flyer ticket and flew back to Ohio, and we just decided to keep going. And out of that, 5+ years later, it's become a national nonprofit with a mission to bring Americans together, to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. And our pledges as individuals, we try to understand the other side's point of view, even if we don't agree with it. In our communities, we engage those we disagree with, looking for common ground and ways to work together. And in politics, we support principles that bring us together rather than divide us. So we are a membership organization. Costs $12 a year to join. We have about 15,000 members, volunteers in all 50 states. Our leadership is by rule, by charter, is half red, half blue. So we try to really walk the talk in terms of red and blue. We define red as leaning more conservative, tending to vote for Republicans more often than Democrats. Blue, leaning more liberal, tending to vote for blue, leaning more liberal, tending to vote for Democrats more than Republicans. So that's Braver Angels. And specifically, last slide here, we offer workshops that are designed to help people depolarize, to understand the other side better, to learn skills that are necessary in a democracy that where we don't know how to talk together across differences. So you can see here, we shifted online, now we're returning to in person. I won't go through all of these, but I'll emphasize just a couple of them. The red blue workshop is what we started with in Ohio. We bring 10 reds and blues together for either 3 hours or a full day with the goal of understanding each other across differences and looking for common ground. And I'll mention one that's coming up in your community, Depolarizing Within. So this is a 2.5 or 3 hour workshop where what we do is everybody self-assesses our inner polarizer, the part of me that tends to stereotype, dismiss, demonize the other side. And so how do I depolarize myself so that I am not just living out by stereotypes of other people? And then how do I speak up in conversations with people who are like-minded when those conversations veer into what I call the four horsemen of polarization: stereotyping, dismissing, ridiculing, and contempt for the 70 million people, some of whom are in my family, who think and vote differently than I do. So, and we've got Families in Politics, we've got debates, webinars, podcasts, lots of things we do. We're getting academics now who are interested in what we're doing, because we've done 1,800 of these workshops around the country, and we're finding from the studies that these workshops actually do change people's attitudes towards the political other. So we're happy with what we're seeing in terms of their effectiveness. We also have one-to-one conversations, unfacilitated, red, blue, rural, metro, white, person of color, that use some of the principles and strategies of our workshops. And then I'll end with new thing that's happening is what we call braver politics, and that is we've been increasingly approached by elected officials who I said are not enjoying themselves these days. A lot of people go to legislate or to be on a county commission to make sure the roads are going well, and they're just caught up in sometimes endless partisan bickering. And so we have neighborhood conversations with candidates. We have a workshop called Managing Difficult Conversations with Constituents and Colleagues, where we help elected officials with the skills that are kind of advanced skills for a polarized era. And we also have candidate debates in town halls. Been delighted to be able to come and talk about the problem, which is a very serious problem. And this is what we're trying to do with Braver Angels. I know that there's interest in lacrosse and environments of working with us on this. People who go to workshops then can join alliances, Braver Angels alliances, to carry the work on together. And also just we as individual citizens now, I think, have a responsibility, if we've been on the sidelines on this, to get into the action, not the action of further destroying bridges, but the action of being a bridge builder. So I'm going to close with that, and I guess we're going to have some Q&A.
Well, thank you. And can you hear us, Bill, for that microphone here?
Yeah, it's a little hard to hear you, but I'll do my best.
Okay, well, we have some time for some questions. I would invite people here to come up to the microphone, and as we do with Rotarian leaders, introduce yourself and answer your question.
Hello, my name is Mary Beth Hensel. Thank you so much for that fascinating, interesting, and engaging presentation. So much to be learned. My question is, does the organization have membership demographics for age, race, gender identity, ethnicity, other, identities such as that? How people, do you have demographics on that? And then also, what would be do you have representation of those things in the leadership who facilitate the workshops?
I heard the first question, which is what does our what our demographics and identities look like? And I think the second question was that how does that look in the workshops? Did I hear those two questions correctly?
That's our leadership and demographics and leadership as well.
Okay, yeah, that's an important question. We are more white than anything else. We are more educated than anything else. And these are issues that we are working on and thinking about. We have, as I said, more college educated folks. And so we've developed an initiative a We the People initiative to try to attract more working class folks. So we're kind of at the mercy of who wants to join and who wants to show up. And to be frank, at this point, those are mostly been white, well-educated folks.
And age, anything in age? Sure, you hear that question. So we have another question here.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Holtmeyer. I have a question about maybe it's just a comment that I think part of the reason for polarization is thinking about there being two poles. There's binary thinking that there are red or blue, rural or metro, white or person of color, and there might be a lot of opportunity in looking at the nuances in between. There's a lot more independence than there used to be. A lot more people identifying as independent. If you look at lacrosse, the community that we're in right now, it could be argued as being the big city. When you talk to people in rural areas, we could be looked at as a tiny little town. When you talk to somebody from Minneapolis, from San Luis. So there's nuance, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for your conversations in exploring those nuances. So I appreciate the fact that you've opened the conversation, and I hope that can be looked at a more granular level.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure I got all of it. I'm sort of hearing a bouncing off the walls of the room into my Zoom audio here. But I think the comment, which is an important one, about the kind of range of folks we have in our country, not all red or blue, not all black or white. So I want to say a couple things about that all of our workshops are open to anybody at any place on a political spectrum. And I also want to say that I think we do have a red-blue divide in this country. That is a serious one that I think needs to be named. And so we don't want to shy away from that. The third comment I'll make is that political independence, according to what the political scientists look at in the surveys, there's only a small percentage of people in the country who don't lean more conservative or lean more liberal. So there are a lot of people who are political independents who don't belong to either party, may not like either party. But only about 5% of Americans do not have a lean in a more conservative direction or a more liberal direction. And so we don't use Republican and Democrat, we use red, blue, but we also acknowledge that there's a small percentage of people don't identify with either, and they're welcome both to the workshops and in leadership. So it's an important issue you raise, that the binary language can accentuate differences. On the other hand, to just ignore, we don't want to ignore the realities that there are people are dividing up on that kind of red-blue continuum. So it's an important question that we actually keep talking about in our meetings. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Tim Doherty. Following up on that, as you said, everybody seems to lean one way or the other. But I think from a politician standpoint, if somebody is trying to lean a little more towards the middle, all of a sudden they get primary because of they're not part of the extremes of right or left or blue or red. And it seems like the primaries bring out more of this extreme voters than the rest of the population. They may not come out and vote in the primaries like they're going on. And yet, I, for one, would like to see more of these candidates who are willing to explore going across the aisle. How do you address that?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I'm not sure there's a question in that. I heard a valuable comment. Was there a question in there?
How do you encourage the politicians, especially when you're meeting with them, to be able to explain how they can lean towards the center and not be railroaded out of their position?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we don't actually coach politicians on their strategy. What we try to do, though, is bring them together through forums, debates, various dialogues to where they encounter people on the other side, and they're encouraged to look for common ground with those folks. And there are existing groups, like in Congress, the Problem Solvers Caucus is a group of about 60 members of the House of Representatives, half Republican, half Democrat, who are committed to bipartisanship. So we try to celebrate them, acknowledge them. So we try to acknowledge politicians who reach out across differences. The other thing I want to say that's really important, and I'm glad you raised the issue of the middle, is in Braver Angels, we do not have a position that people should be in the middle. Our view is that you can be strong liberal, strong conservative, come together, listen to each other, see what common ground is there. So we are not a centrist or middle ground party. We're more interested in how people solve problems together, communicate, avoid demonizing each other. And some people will move towards the middle when that happens, which is fine. But our goal is not to create more kind of centrism. And nor do we coach politicians, of course, we're not qualified for that, of how they should position themselves. So thank you for that comment and question.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, Bill, and my name is Brandon Harris. Thanks for your presentation today. Conflict is captivating, and with many of the media platforms that are available, whether it's traditional media or social media, they're based on engagement, and so by fueling the conflict, they can drive their engagement ratings. How do we encourage media outlets to take a stance of unification when it's possibly against their commercial interest?
Oh, that's a big one. I think we the people, we individuals together and collectively have to be naming the kind of poison. We have to be talking about the poison that's happening, particularly with social media, and speak out individually, speak out collectively about it. I know that there are certainly political leaders are starting to talk about this. There are powerful economic forces that you pointed out. So the social media becomes and let's face it, some of the TV networks become outrage machines. And we know the psychology of this from research, that we are much more captivated by negatives, the things that outrage us. We're more to act, to give money and that kind of thing. So we need to have this conversation about the poisonous effect of media and social media on our ability to deal with one another and solve problems in this democracy. The other thing I'll say, and it's just a small contribution, but we now have a workshop on how to be a braver angel in social media, how to not contribute to the polarization, so we can all develop better practices ourselves in our media consumption and our use of social media. So thank you. A huge issue that we collectively have to deal with.
Thank you, Bill. And I want to mention again, there is a next step here in La Crosse. Cameron Swallow, who is the Wisconsin coordinator for Braver Angels, she's on our Zoom today, will be here on September 10th for a 2.5-hour Saturday morning workshop. It's a no-cost event that is open to the public, and more details will be coming forward, but you can get information now at the website of the US. Thank you again, Bill. This has been a wonderful presentation. Best wishes.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to supporting your efforts.
Thank you also, Bill. For me, I apologize for the technical difficulties for blaming the person responsible for the internet. I hope that's not you. I know that's not me. With that, we're going to get right into guests and visiting Rotarians. Introducing them today is Peter Grable,